and this camera is crooked. We're in a new spot because it's really cloudy, like thunderstorming outside. So you might also hear some thunder. Don't be alarmed. Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name's Michelle. I'm doing my June wrap up. We are in like a new spot because I wasn't expecting it to be cloudy. I had like scheduled filming time for this afternoon and it's like thunderstorming, which is rude of it. But we're making it work. You're sitting in a window. It's gorgeous and fun and fantastic. Anyway, in the month of June, I read 6 books, which we're still not doing excellent. We're working, we're getting there, but like, we've done better. I'm going to walk you through everything I read in the month of June. All 6 of my books. There were some real bops in there. So even though it wasn't very many, a good time was still had. I read 2 really good thrillers. I read a romance book. I read a poetry collection. I read some other stuff. The first thing I finished in the month of June was Game of Thrones. I started this in May. These books are chunky little fellas. And I have been listening to the audiobook. I've been doing kind of a mix, like audiobook sometimes, physical book sometimes. But the audiobook for the first one was 30 hours. I'm like halfway through the second one and then it's 33 hours. So like that's a lot of hours. These are chunky boys. I have not read Game of Thrones before. I know it was like really popular in like the early to mid 20-teens, but I didn't read them at that time, nor did I watch the TV show, although I was like vaguely aware of when it was happening. That being said, I do know some like vague spoilers from the series just because like I existed while the show was airing, but it's been a really good time. If you don't know anything about Game of Thrones, and like truly I don't think I did, I knew like a lot of character names, but I didn't know like the premise. So Game of Thrones refers to the idea of like all of these people competing for the throne. So you might think that Game of Thrones is actually about like these people competing for the throne, not in like a Hunger Games sort of way, but in like a military strategy sort of way. But like honestly, that's not really what happens in the first book. We start out with this family called the Starks. The Stark family, they have a mom and a dad whose names are I don't know, and Caitlin. And then they have a bunch of kids. They have their oldest son, whose name I don't remember. This is going really well. I don't remember. Then they have 2 daughters named Arya and Sansa, and I love both those girls so much. And then they have 2 younger sons named Bran and a little one that's like 2, and so like he's not that relevant to the plot yet, so he doesn't really have a name that I recall. And then we also have Jon Snow, and Jon Snow is just like a few months younger, the same age, a few months older, right on the same age as their eldest son, but he's a bastard. So his mom is not the same mom as everyone else, and so that's why his name is Jon Snow instead of Jon Stark, because if you are a bastard child, you get the last name Snow. But like growing up, he's lived with this family, and like honestly, he's like it's evident that he's not one of their like original kids, but like he hangs out with all the siblings, like it's a good time. So we open with them, and they live way up in the north in this kingdom, and that's where we start. So we have like them, they have stuff happening there, and then we have the Lannisters and the Baratheons, and they are on like the like capital city, and the Lannisters are all sneaky little sneakers. They're up to no good. So the Lannisters are. And most importantly at this point, we're following Tyrion, who is like the younger brother of Cersei. And Cersei, I'm gonna say her name different every time I say it, so that's special. And Cersei is the queen, and she married Robert Baratheon. And Robert Baratheon is the king, and he took over from the, what are their names? They're like the House of Dragon girlies. Targaryens. He took over from the Targaryens. The Targaryens were the royal family. Robert Baratheon came in and took them over. Robert Stark helped with that. But like now everyone's kind of living their lives, and then things become unsettled. And then we are also following Daenerys, who is now living on kind of like the southern continent. She's like across a sea from everyone else. And Daenerys is like the last of the Targaryens. Her and her brother Daenerys are like the last of the Targaryens, and they were like the dragon people. Like they all had pet dragons, but now all the dragons are dead. And so like that's kind of where we're at. So there's like a lot of characters, but honestly I felt like it was very easy to follow. I'm explaining it quite poorly, but I feel like for the most part I kind of had a good sense of what was happening. I didn't like lose the plot too often, although why are there so many people named Brandon? Like every third man in this book is named Brandon, I don't know, some like derivative of Brandon, and that is slightly confusing to me. But beyond that, like I feel like it's pretty easy to follow. The characters are like very distinctive. I also didn't realize that a lot of the characters we're following, because like the names, like I said, the names were familiar to me because I've like seen the HBO TV show, not actually episodes, but like, oh, I know what Daenerys Targaryen looks like because like I've seen Emilia Clarke in the blonde wig, you know. They're like children when we're starting. Like Jon Snow is 15, Daenerys is 13, which like, it's alarming that Daenerys is 13. I do have to age her up in my brain because otherwise, Sansa is like 11 and Arya is like 9, I think. Bran is like 7. Like these are like children. So a lot of the characters we're getting POVs from are like kids and teens, which is kind of fun. And yeah, so far I'm really enjoying it. Like I said, I'm about halfway through the second book now. It is like a pretty accessible fantasy. I have like desired, ever since I read Throne of Glass and absolutely loved it, I like have wanted to read more fantasy, and I am like really enjoying this one so far. Then I read The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This was a thriller that I was excited to read. I didn't read Taylor Adams' last book, Hairpin Bridge, because I heard nothing but terrible things. Like I didn't hear one single positive thing about it, so decided to skip it. But his first book, or his first thriller that I was aware of, was No Exit, which came out in like 2020 maybe. And that one is so good. One of the best thrillers I've ever read. Just like a compulsively readable, like edge of your seat. There's like some twists, but like you're really there for like the action, the drama of it all. And this book felt really similarly. Like I felt, there's definitely like twists and turns. I felt the twists were like pretty predictable for the most part. But like I was so on the edge of my seat the whole time that like I wasn't bothered by that. It's following this young woman. She is house sitting in this like kind of remote house in Washington, and it's just her and her dog. So she is house sitting, and she's like a big reader, and she's been reading a ton. And she reads this book that is absolutely terrible. It's like an indie published book, and she reads it and it's like absolute garbage. Like it clearly was just like chucked up there, not proofread, like not anything. It's like a murder mystery, and it's like really gory for like what reason. And she leaves an absolutely heinous review. She leaves like a 1 star and says she would like rather like be like ill than have to read this book again. Like it's a pretty scathing review. And then like a day or two later, she starts getting these threatening emails from the author telling her to take the review down. And then a few days after that, weird stuff starts happening at the house, and she's like very concerned that that author may have decided to just like pay her a house visit because of her review. And things spiral from there. I did have to like put this book down and pick it up again later because it got so scary. I was like truly petrified in the first like 50 or 60 pages because it does involve like a home invasion sort of situation in which this man does show up at her house. Spoiler, a creepy man shows up at her house, and that is truly like a fear for me. Like The Strangers, that movie that came out in like 2008, that trailer gave me like nightmares. Like I can to this day not see that trailer without being like truly terrified. Next, I read a little romance. I read the last Lily Gold book that I have left to read. I think her new one comes out in the next couple months. I'm hoping. I've seen the cover, it's purple. But Lily Gold, if you don't know, if you haven't been here before, I'm a big Lily Gold fan. She's on Kindle Unlimited, and she writes teamwork romances. So there's 3 guys, 1 girl. They all date her at the same time. This one is called Triple Duty Bodyguard. It is about this starlet, and she has this like stalker situation where this man has broken into her house and is just like being a like real creeper. And so she has to hire this security team, and she hires this security team, and it's 3 men that like are with her around the clock. And most of the book, Lily Gold is British, and so the book starts in London, but then a lot of the book actually takes place in LA because she has to take a trip out there for work, and the bodyguards come with her. And it was so good, so delightful. I feel like Lily Gold books are just like, they're super spicy, but they are so emotional too. Like I've teared up in every single one of her books. I feel like the relationships are brilliant. I feel like she does such a good job crafting these male characters. They really feel like individuals. Like at no point am I ever mixing up her male characters, even though I couldn't tell you their names now. That's a me problem, not a Lily Gold problem. And it was just like such a fun little time. Like it was so fun. Charming. I like deals with like some heavier topics. Like we really talk about PTSD in this one. And I just feel like she's like so excellent and has like become one of my favorite Kindle Unlimited authors. Next was another thriller. I read The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. I had read Rachel Hawkins' debut novel. I haven't read the one in between, but I'm going to because I loved The Villa so much. This book was so dynamic and interesting. It was unlike anything I had ever read, and I love that within the thriller genre. I have read a lot of thrillers, and this is a me problem, not necessarily like a book problem, but now if I'm reading a domestic like husband and wife thriller, like a lot of the times I get kind of bored by like the basics of it, because there's only so many twists that are like possible to do, you know? And so this one had like a really interesting setup and premise. So we're following two timelines. In the kind of main timeline, we're following these two women. They're in their early 30s, I believe. They are like close friends from college, and they kind of have like a toxic sort of relationship. They're both authors. Our like POV heroine character writes like cozy mysteries, and her best friend is like a Rachel Hollis self-help type girly. And our main POV character is like separated from her husband. And so her best friend is like, why don't you come with me? We will spend the summer in Italy writing in a villa. Like, we'll take this as like a writing retreat summer. And she agrees. And so they go to this villa in Italy. It is not until she arrives at this villa that she realizes that her friend has booked her this villa that is very famous for being the site of this murder that happened in like the 50s or 60s. Essentially a group of like musicians were staying there with like their wives and girlfriends were also there over the summer, and it ended with like a brutal murder. And then afterwards, one of the girlfriends winds up writing a horror novel, and it's like one of the most famous horror novels of all time. And we are also following the journal entries of this woman who then later writes this horror novel, but it's about her experience of the summer. We know this horrible murder happens at the end of the summer, so we're kind of like watching as the summer unfolds and trying to figure out like what the heck happened over the course of the summer to lead to this brutal murder, while we also have these two women staying here, and they have like a very toxic, like kind of treacherous relationship. It was so compelling and dynamic and interesting. I feel like you almost have that like Daisy Jones and the Six sort of dynamic with like the musicians, in that they like all have kind of like personalities and like a lot of trauma and flaws, and they're like definitely butting heads over and over again in those journal entries. Then we have like the toxic friendship of the girls in present day, and like the past is told in these journal entries, so it's not entirely, we're not sure what to like believe and what may be fabricated. There's almost like a Verity-esque aspect to it, in that like as we read this journal entry, we're like, wait, is it what we were told what happened, or is like this what actually happened? I don't know. It was fascinating. It was good. It was like a really juicy, interesting, dynamic thriller that was like something I had never read before. Loved it. And then I read another little KU romance. I read Liars Like Us by J.T. Geissinger. J.T. Geissinger wrote my favorite mafia romance, which is the Queens and Monsters series. She writes books that are very outlandish. If you need realism in your romance novels, she's probably not for you. I don't. I am here for like a wild, good, fun time. And the thing that I hate more than anything else in a romance novel is being bored. Hate being bored in a romance novel. And I'm never bored in these books. Okay? That being said, do you know that they tend to be like a little bit darker? I wouldn't say they're like super, super dark romances, but like if you are sensitive to like darker romance sort of stuff, check content warnings. Do be aware they're not like super light, fluffy rom-coms. There's darker stuff happening. There's like, you know what goes with a dark romance. You know what goes with a mafia style. This one's not a mafia romance. This one is like a billionaire romance. We are following this woman. She owns a bookstore, and it's like her father's bookstore who has passed it down to her, and she's owned it for like years and years, but she's gonna have to close because this big box bookstore moved in across the street that is like undercutting her in all of her prices, and so she like just can't afford to keep her store open. And so she's taking her staff out to dinner to kind of like explain to them the situation, when a man at the table overhears the conversation that is happening, and he just happens to be a billionaire. How convenient. And he makes her a proposition. He, in order to receive his inheritance, or like, I don't know, activate his trust fund, whatever, needs to be married, and she needs money. So he says, I will marry you and give you a heck of money, and then I will get my inheritance and you can save your bookstore. And she's like, this setup sounds literally bananas. Who are you and what are you doing? Like, she's immediately wary of this, which like, good on her. Because I feel like often people are not wary enough of these situations. She's really wary. And he just like continues to try to convince her to marry him. This book, like I said, was cuckoo bananas. Like, it's a dark romance, but it's like silly. I loved it. I had such a good time. I was never bored for a second, but like, it's cuckoo bananas. So do know that before going in. And then the last thing I read this month was a poetry collection by Morgan Parker called There Are More Beautiful Things Than Beyonce. I've actually been reading this for most of the year. I don't know if I started it in January or like February. But I've been reading it for a while. I like to have a poetry collection that I go through like quite slowly. I read like a poem or two at a time. And this one was like a gorgeous collection. It is largely about being like a Black woman in America and what that looks like and what that feels like, and particularly engaging with like romance and relationships with men, and also like beauty standards, but just like life as a Black woman in America. And I thought it was really well done. I think it's really gripping. It is like a grittier poetry collection. I feel like oftentimes when we like think poetry, we think something like quite flowery and like Mary Oliver, and I do love a Mary Oliver. This was like significantly grittier and like often darker because of the experience that it was conveying, I think, and the aspect of the experience that she wanted to convey is grittier and darker, but it was still like quite beautiful. I really, really enjoyed it. Okay. That's it. That's all I read this month. I don't know how I rambled for so long about so few books. Actually, I do. I told you in way too much depth about what Game of Thrones is about. I mostly was just like trying to prove to you that I know the names of all of the families. So, not to brag. But that is all I have for you today. I hope that the lighting situation wasn't too bonkers bananas for today's video. And I will see you next month, where we are going to be on track because we are going to be reading 10 books a month going forward. I've already have one book in the bag for July, which is July 4th, so I should have at least one. I did take a detour, confession. If you're watching this long, you get to hear this confession. I did start reading Manacled again. No, Michelle, don't do that. I'm halfway through it, actually. I don't know what compelled me to read. This is the third time I've read it. I read it for the first time in April of last year. And I read it again in January, I think, of this year. And I'm reading it again. I think I got like a TikTok or something talking about Manacled, and then I tried to read a couple of their Hermione fanfiction pieces, and like none of them were hitting the spot. Like I just wanted to reread Manacled, and so I gave in and I started rereading it. And it's so good. Anyway, I'm hoping this doesn't start a whole Hermione spiral, but now TikTok knows that I'm like reading Hermione fanfiction, and all they've been feeding me is more Hermione fanfiction recommendations. And so I do have a list of like 10 fics long that people are like, read. But like, one of the best books I read this year was a Hermione fanfiction. One of the books I read last year was a Hermione fanfiction. Maybe I should just give up and just read Hermione fanfiction. Like, clearly, the hundreds of books I have in my room are not doing it for me. The amount of library books I have currently checked out in my possession is maybe illegal. I think they might be coming for me. But anyway, that's all. I just wanted to confess that to you, to the people who stuck around to the end. I am reading Manacled again. And I don't count rereads towards my book totals, so it's not even gonna help me. That's actually all. I will see you in the next video. Have a good night, or good afternoon, or good morning. I don't know. Live your life, live your truth. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.